which we are now. Thank you, and welcome to the Planning Committee, the County Planning Committee, taking place today, Tuesday the 6th of December 2022. I'm George Richardson and I'm chairing today's meeting. We have a number of officers with us this morning who will now ask to introduce themselves, starting with Kirsty on my right.
Kirsty Charlton, Committee Services.
Neil Carter, I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Stephen Reid, I'm the Planning Manager, Chair.
Chris Shields, Senior Planning Officer.
Phil Harrison, Highways.
Thank you. Have we any apologies for our absence, please, Kirsty?
Councillors Malloy, Shaw and Wilson.
And I would think Cathy Hunt should go down there because I know she's ill. Thank you. Any substitute members?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Somebody didn't turn his phone off when he was asked. Can we have the... Sorry, Dave? Minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November 2022. Can we agree those minutes, please? Thank you. Now the applications to be determined, and we've only got one on the agenda this morning. It's DM/22/019117/WAS Unit 9 Byron House, Haldene Way, Seaham Grange, Seaham. Change of use. We have 4 registered speakers for this item. I'll now ask Chris Shields, Senior Planning Officer, to present his report, which is on pages 11 to 32. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is for a change of use from storage to pet crematorium at Unit 9 Byron House, Seaham Grange Industrial Estate. So on this slide you can see the location of the site within Seaham Grange Industrial Estate, and it's this unit outlined in red on the plan. There's a range of other small units within the wider Byron House building here. An aerial view of the site. See the parking spaces around it. There's parking at the north for used car sales. Other units around the site as well. You can see the residential properties just on Stockton Road to the north here, and then on the Glebe Estate to the east. This is a picture of where the unit is, and it is just this unit here that I'm showing with the pointer. And that's just Unit 9 in the corner there. This is a site entrance into Byron House from the internal industrial estate road. And this is a visualisation of the external changes of the building. As you can see from this drawing, it doesn't include the adjoining units to the east of Unit 9. The only change proposed is the inclusion of this additional chimney stack on the building for the cremator. If we just skip back to the view of it, you can see that other buildings, other units have chimneys on them, although they're not as tall as the proposed chimney. In terms of representations, we've had no objections received from statutory and internal consultees, subject to conditions where appropriate. We have received 13 letters of objection during the determination of the application, and these have raised issues of noise, emissions, odour, impact to property value, and the site being too close to residential properties. Concerns have also been raised that the proposal is in breach of the Cremation Act 1902 and that consultation was too limited. Just to touch on that, the Cremation Act only applies to burning of human remains, nothing else. Seaham Town Council have objected to the development, considering it would cause harmful pollutants to be airborne in the local atmosphere with a negative effect on residents. In summary, the development would provide a pet crematorium for the northeast of the county, which is not currently served by this type of facility. The development would make use of an existing unit on an allocated industrial estate, which accords with the locational criteria for waste development set out in Policy 61 of the County Durham Plan. Potential impacts of development in relation to highway safety and access, residential amenity, design, heritage, ecology, flooding and drainage have been fully assessed and found to be acceptable, subject to conditions where appropriate. The development would be fully contained within an industrial building on a site allocated for employment use. The development has generated public interest, with the objections from local residents having been taken into account in the determination of the application, along with other responses, including those of statutory consultees that have raised no objections to the proposal, subject to conditions. Whilst mindful of the nature and weight of public concerns, it's considered that these are not sufficient to outweigh the planning judgment in favour of the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now then, we have no registered speakers from the parish council, although the parish council have objected, which it's always nice if they could come. So it's over to the local member, in this case, Councillor McKenna. Can you address the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair and Committee. Thanks for keeping the aerial photograph. Just before I really start, can we just take note, Committee, of the distance between the proposed property and the back gardens of the 5 dwellings that are affected by this application? It roughly 20 metres from the applicant's proposal for the pet crematorium to the tree line, which is the borders of the premises and the gardens. I am asking the committee to oppose the planning application for the pet crematorium. I do not object to pet crematoriums, as I am a dog owner and I understand these facilities are required. However, the proposed site is too close to residential properties. A pet crematorium service is available in the East Durham area. However, it is in Sunderland, located less than 10 miles away from the proposed same site. This is not in the planning report. I contest there is not a need for a pet crematorium in Seam when there are facilities in Hartlepool, Durham and Sunderland, which all border my ward. The planning report states that the crematorium is approximately 40 metres from properties on Stockton Road. However, at its nearest point, the crematorium and its 10.7 metre chimney is approximately 20 metres from residents' gardens. The site of the crematorium in operation and its 10.7 metre chimney is a view that few would want to enjoy while sitting in the garden in the summer months. If approved, we create a precedent that permits a pet crematorium to be located in a residential area. I'm also concerned about the impact on neighbouring businesses in close proximity to the proposal. I ask councillors, would you be happy to have your children or grandchildren playing at the fun shack or using the sensory play area while animal carcasses are being cremated a matter of metres away? Residents already experience fumes from Mission Foods Bakery on the industrial estate. What would the impact be on this business if clients are aware that the bakery is sharing the same airspace as a crematorium? There is other food production in the industrial estate, such as Premier Cheese, Stirring Foods, which makes me question the suitability of the site. ATD Fitness, Urban Creative, all promote healthy lifestyle, and they will have to think twice before opening the windows and ventilating the workspaces if the crematorium is in operation. The site must be assessed on its merits, and will a pet crematorium enhance local businesses and the environment or detract to be a potential source of conflict, undermining the health, welfare and living conditions of residents and businesses? Reference is made to the Cremations Act 1902 and dismissed as the references to human remains. I would ask the committee to consider the intentions of the Act. In 1902, 120 years ago, Cremation of human remains was a new process. There was just 451 cremations in 1902 across the British Isles. The idea of animal cremations would have been a completely alien concept, which is not referenced in the Act. This is a failure of imagination how society would change over 120 years and should not detract from the fact that concerns for cremating human remains are the same as for animal remains when it comes to public health and safety. The Act is quoted to say, no crematorium should be constructed near any dwelling house within 200 yards except with the consent in writing of the lessee, the occupier of such house, or within 50 yards of a public highway. If this planning application is passed, we are consenting to cremations within 50 yards of dwellings. Those who drafted the Cremation Act, due to care and attention for public wealth and health of cremations in the process, the residents of my ward should not be penalised that 120 years ago legislators could not comprehend animal cremations. The planning report acknowledges that the crematorium does not fit with the specific classes of uses for this site, and I agree. I ask that the committee to retain the integrity of the site for its intended purposes. The objections and concerns of residents, those who will have to live within the development, and is sufficient to object to this application. I also ask you to consider whether this would be appropriate development in your own ward, or whether you would be happy to live within 20 metres of such a facility. Committee Chair, thank you for your time. I hope you can see by the explanation I've made that the distance is the key. We're not opposed to pet crematoriums at all, but we are opposed to the location and its proximity and how close it is to our residents, especially the 5 houses that are affected by this planning application. Thank you again, and I hope you reject this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, David. We now have 2 objectors for this item, Karen Robinson and Campbell Henderson. Can you please address the committee, and we'll give you 3 minutes each.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak to this committee. If I can start by letting you know that I'm here representing my 89-year-old father and 84-year-old mother. They have lived in either Eastleigh or Rydale on Stockton Road for more than 30 years. When they first moved there were 4 houses, 2 sets of semis. They enjoyed living there so much that in 1994 they decided to build their own dormer bungalow next to the end semi that they currently lived in. All the properties overlooked open farmers' fields to 3 aspects, and to the front of the house was the main B1285 running through Seaham, and 2 bus stops, one on either side of the road. Then, around 1998, the Seaham Grange Industrial Estate was built. In order for the 5 properties not to be overlooked by the units and offices, the council planted quick-growing trees to each side of the residences and at the bottom of each garden. Over the years, as new businesses have arrived, some small, others medium-sized businesses, the traffic, noise and smells have increased. My parents and the other residents have never made formal complaints. However, because of a prevailing westerly wind, the pungent garlic odours can be quite sickening at times, and the early morning shift changes when workers congregate at the bus stops at 6 a.m. can be very noisy. If we are to add to this the possibility of fumes and odours from dead animal carcasses and possible invisible particles of crushed bones and pollutants, then my elderly parents and the other residents' health could be affected. In August 2022, my parents and the other residences received letters from Durham County Council notifying them of a proposed change of use to Unit 9. All of the residents lodged objections to this before the due date. My parents were very upset and wrote to their MP, whom I know made representation to Durham County Council on their behalf, and they also got in touch with Mr McKenna and same Town Council because they felt so strongly about this. It was hard to believe that only 5 residences were sent this information, and yet Glebe Estate, Fieldhouse Farm and other residences were not informed. Why? We were informed by Mr McKenna that the council had given a couple of extra weeks' time for the residents to lodge
30
objections.
seconds remaining.
Sorry? However, none of these residents were sent out letters. My mum and dad went out and they went and done a petition. At the time, my mum had 3 broken toes and she went out with a walking stick collecting over 30 signatures. My parents have owned their own business and they know the importance of businesses. But I wonder how many of us would be happy with the prospect of the crematorium as close to your back garden as that. As stated, they have owned businesses and they're not averse to the pet crematorium per se, just the distance.
Can you wrap up now, Karen?
I can, yes. However, I would stress that the location of Unit 9 is not appropriate for this purpose.
Thank you. Campbell Henderson next, please, and you'll have 3 minutes, and Kirsty will let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Glebe Drive housing estate, sits 100 metres from the proposed development, and I've been a resident for 23 years. Could Mr Shields just bring back up the side profile of that building, please? I believe in the planning application after reading through it, what it's not pointing out is if you see the 2nd floor of that building, that's offices. That's where people are working. And if you bring up the plan, near to where those people are working, there's going to be waste products emanating from the top of that chimney and dispersing in the air. If you look at the trees around, that's then got to get away from that area, that cul-de-sac. It's then got to disperse itself in the air somehow. Now, when this estate was built, it was built as a food park with that in mind. They attracted Mission Foods, which it wasn't Mission at the time, Premier Cheese, both worldwide companies who employ a large number of people. It's my fear that building this may prevent other businesses coming to that area. There's talk of cremating only a small number of pets a day. So if the business is a success, running 24 hours a day, what about the residents who live nearby? The other businesses, what about expansion? Everything I've read about these incinerators draw the fact to the lack of legislation and regulation around them, and the fact that all waste dispersed is not guaranteed to be within guidelines. The incinerator we were led to believe was safe. However, there's talk of a plan in place in case pollution escapes. How can you put something back once it escapes? So close to so many houses. No company can independently guarantee that no pollution will escape into the air. Applications in other areas of the country have been turned down on this fact alone. And the simple fact is, it depends what you put in it, what volume you put in it. We don't know. So 100 metres from my home and 40 metres from my neighbours, a chimney stack will be distributing a vapour and odour of someone's pet being cremated. Knowing this fact, would I be able to open my windows? Would I be able to enjoy my garden in the summer without the fine mist of someone's dead pet being distributed around the built-up area?
30 seconds remaining.
So, Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, the right to privacy and a family life rely on the local authority considering the public interest regarding this application, outweighing the concerns of local residents. In short, is it necessary to build it so close to people's homes? If this proposal is approved, it would set a precedent for any further development near homes, schools and shops. Ask the Planning Committee, when considering this proposal, to consider if they would be happy to have this development 40 metres from their home. I do believe there is a place for this type of business, but the location is key in the fact that not enough is known about these incinerators and the potential environmental and health issues
Thank you,
they may
Campbell.
cause.
Thank you, Campbell. Time's up. We now go over to the applicant, Laura Howes.
Good morning.
You'll have 5 minutes, Laura.
Okay, thank you.
Kirsty will let you know.
Right. I'm Laura Howes, the applicant, and together with my son John and daughter-in-law Ruth, we propose to operate the Pet Crematorium in Seaham. We've put a lot of thought into it and invested a lot of time and money in deciding to make this lifetime commitment. I think Chris has already summed up all the points raised by the objectors, and everything seems to be answered. I did have a little bit of a speech to make, but I think just going to answer some more of the objections that's been brought today. It's been said about the 1902 Cremation Act, and yes, that is for human remains. However, we are not a human cremation service. We are classed as a waste disposal site, and as such, that doesn't apply to us. But I'm sure most of you have unfortunately been to a cremation at some time, a human cremation at some time in your life. And have you ever noticed the smell of burning flesh or the smoke coming away from the chimney? And we're not even going to be on the amount of that site. Our machine we chose from Adfield, the UK and international leaders of the market. They have been in the incineration business for more than 30 years. We chose their machine because of its design. It's advertised as smokeless, odourless, quiet, and with consultations with our independent ecologist and Durham environmental team, it's concluded that we won't affect the public in any way, nor that of the local wildlife in the area. Do you want to add anything to this? No. And yes, animals have usually been incinerated in some way forever, but they usually were done in a field without any in the open air. And the pet creme is more environmentally friendly, as it does have a chimney, but that chimney has an integrated pollution prevention control within it, and will be very low emissions coming from that chimney. I don't know what else to say. And at the beginning it will be a very small, low-key affair, just run by the three of us. I'm very nervous, as you can tell. That's enough. I think all the objections have been all the objections to our proposal, I hope they've been, well obviously they haven't, but I had hoped that they would have been allayed with the Chief Planning Officer's report, as he's answered all the objections. In my mind, he's answered all the objections within that anyway, and that of the experts. So I hope that with all the relevant information that you've got, and the need for this service in our hometown will be noted, and hopefully grant us a favourable outcome so that we can proceed with this pet crematorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura, and well done. It's okay to be nervous. I'm nervous. We can now ask questions of the speakers. Is yours a question, Patricia? And Maura, after.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell me how many cremations have you factored in per day in your business plan? And it's a two-part question. And what is the capacity on that with that facility? In other words, how many could you do in a day if you were full up?
Yeah, that's fine. In its infancy, we anticipate it to be about 3 or 4 animal cremations per day, but we have given the transparency of giving you the information of its maximum capacity would be 7 per day. 7 per day is the maximum the machine could cope with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maura? Can you switch your mic off, Pat?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I used to sit on the committee for the South Road Crematorium in Durham, and I remember when I joined the committee there was a massive bill of over £1 million for the extraction and mercury filtration system that was put onto the crematorium. I know it's a very different scale, but it's not just smoke and ash that comes out of burning any kind of animal remain at scale like that. It's also mercury and other dangerous metals. You've talked a bit about how it's smokeless and odourless, but what would your plan be for maintaining that particular part of the structure, given that, as we've already alluded to, it's a fairly unregulated area of the economy?
Well, we've chosen our machine. From Adfield, as I said, the leaders in the market. They've dealt with incinerations, not only pet crematoriums, but incinerations of all types for over 30 years. They have got a machine we chose for its design. It has a secondary chamber that burns off any excess gases that's created during the cremation process. And also the chimney has an integrated pollution prevention control, so that would prevent any emissions into the air.
Yeah, come back, Maura.
Thank you for that answer. My question was also about ongoing maintenance of that part of the structure. They are expensive to maintain, and if you're only cremating up to 7 a day, then how would you be able to finance the ongoing maintenance of the chamber?
Well, Adfield are very good with their after-sales service. They're on hand with any queries. They also are quite rapid to respond to any breakdowns, and they will do the maintenance. That we've already in a contract for them to do the maintenance if anything was to go wrong with it. We will also do, I think one of the provisions are that we'll do a site-specific odour management plan as well. I don't know if this is answering your question, is it?
Yes, it is. I suppose that the third question for that is how long is the warranty for under which you can get that maintenance done? Because planning permissions are forever and warranties aren't.
I think the warranty was for 10 years, but I'm not sure if that was right. But however, we would want to keep it maintained to get the best out of the machine anyway. And they've never had a machine back in 23 years. They've never had any problems with the pet crematoriums in the last 23 years.
Thank you, Karen and Maura. Anyone else got a question? Just one from myself, for my own curiosity. How large a machine is it? Are we talking just pet cats and dogs and smaller, or anything larger than a dog?
No, it's anything from a hamster up to maybe a Great Dane. Certainly only domestic pets. And the cremators only can cremate up to 45 kilos an hour. And as such, we don't even fall into the parameters of needing an environmental permit.
Thank you. Chris, have you anything to come back on?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of issues, I think. So the main issues that are being raised by objectors are the principal development area where it's located and the impact to residential amenity. The test in Policy 61 of the plan for whether waste development is acceptable on an industrial estate is if it doesn't prejudice the function of the industrial estate or for B1, B2, B8 uses. Now, in this case, we think it would not be, but and the issues that have been raised in relation to the industrial estate are the impact to other sensitive uses, such as the play spaces and the gym, which are not typically acceptable uses on an industrial estate anyway. So it would seem unfair to restrict a use that is compatible with an industrial estate if it's impacting on things that are not. Now, in terms of residential amenity, we've assessed this quite carefully. We've made them do dispersion modelling and had that checked over by our environmental health team and externally with AECOM to make sure that dispersion is acceptable and isn't going to cause any harm. To back that up, we have recommended conditions to ensure that the chimney stack is exactly as they've put in their dispersion model, and for them to put in an odour management plan to make sure that there isn't any odours from the site. Now, another of the questions raised here was in terms of the longevity of the machine and any protections going forward. It's my understanding that this machine is, Councillor McEwen mentioned plant costing more than $1 million just in terms of maintenance, but this machine costs tens of thousands to buy outright. So it isn't a huge expense going forward to entirely renew it, not just maintain it. But added to that, the applicant set out that it's limited to 45 kilograms per hour. If they were to do any more than that, i.e. above 50 kilograms an hour, then they would need an environmental permit. So there's limits on expansion, and I think there's protection going forward as well in terms of maintenance.
All right. Neil going wants to add something. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up two issues that were raised by Councillor McKenna and the speaker, Mr Henderson. So you heard, I think, from Councillor McKenna about the Cremation Act. I think that's adequately covered off in paragraph 129 of the report, but in essence, it's not the concern of the planning system to ensure compliance with other statutory regimes that sit outside of that planning system. And in any event, that particular piece of legislation isn't applicable. I know that Councillor McKenna said, you know, it's likely that the draftsman of that legislation in 1902 didn't foresee pet cremations. That may be the case, but we've had 120 years since then in which Parliament could have legislated for this type of use, and they haven't. So there isn't legislation that covers this particular issue. In respect of the Human Rights Act, which is an issue that the objector, Mr Henderson, raised, he specifically referred to Article 8. That's the right to respect for family, private life, home and correspondence. Clearly that is a right that is engaged here. However, it is a qualified right, and you've heard me say this before in the past, but I'll say it again. That means that there can be an interference with that right insofar as it's in accordance with legislation, in accordance with our domestic law, in this case the planning legislation, and where it's proportionate. So ultimately, our advice to you as members is, if you were to grant permission today for this application, whilst there may be an interference with Article 8 that Mr Henderson has mentioned, that wouldn't be an unlawful interference. It would be perfectly lawful for that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We now open up to the committee for the debate. David, you first, please.
Thanks, Chair. I agree entirely that pet crematoriums is a need for the area, but I would contest that this is possibly the wrong development in wrong development space. I'm very familiar with this area. I think I've taken my grandkids to the Fun Shack on many, many occasions, and I think you can get up to 150, 200 kids and the families in there. And I know that Sam Grange has done a fantastic job of diversifying. You mentioned there's the gym there. I think there's a Christmas shop being opened up there recently. So it's going away from your traditional industrial like units to diversification. Now, I would worry that if this particular proposal was accepted, that this would affect how diverse that particular industrial estate could be. And I'm also concerned about the location of the development in terms of the proximity to residential properties there. I know the proposers said you've been to crematoriums in other areas, and I have been. I've been to crematoriums in Durham and in Hartlepool, but I would contest that they're well removed from residential properties, both of those particular sites. Now this is within just a couple of 20-30 metres of people's properties. So I would argue that there's a lot more sites in East Durham that would be more suitable for this particular development. And I was going to ask, have other sites been like sort of tried to find out whether other sites would be more suitable for this particular development? But in an industrial estate, well, it shouldn't really be termed as an industrial estate because it isn't as much of an industrial estate as like other industrial estates where you do have factories. This is more of a diversified estate of located like sort of gyms, Christmas shops, the fun shack, as I've already mentioned. So I would object to this particular policy, so I can't support it. Sorry.
Thank you, David. I don't think you've ever been sorry about anything. Maura, and then Alan.
Thank you. So the area I represent has quite a few units with odour management plans, and these odour management plans do not get rid of odour in their entirety. There's still an issue with odour surrounding a lot of these places, particularly where there's not a lot of regulation at a national level on other elements of the site. And one of the key parts of, I'd say, the most contentious odour management plan in my area is wind direction. That you can't do the things on the site that you do when the wind is pointing in a direction towards the houses or towards other businesses. Now what you've got here is a site that's surrounded on the 3.5 sides by either residential or business development, and we don't have sight of an odour management plan. So I feel like this is a Policy 31 issue as well, and I have my doubts over the application on the basis of Policy 31.
Thank you, Maura. Now, Alan, over to you, please.
Thank you, George. Yeah, when Chris read the report, I just thought it was a straightforward application, but after listening to the objections and some of the councillors raising various matters here, I do have my concerns. I don't think just because it's not regulated that we shouldn't, like sort of take things into consideration. I think whether it's animal remains or human remains, if it was a human remains, it sort of certainly wouldn't even, I don't think would have been in this committee for a crematorium in this location. I think mixing it in a site close proximity, not only residential, but other uses in relation to, as David says, the children's play area, but the food, and that might also like put people off in the future, sort of bringing new businesses into that park. So I do worry there, and if that did happen, like regarding like the loss of jobs, yeah, it's a difficult one, and I do have sympathy with the applicant, trying to bring the business, but I'm going to echo what David says. I'm just not too comfortable it's in the right location. I think also the chimney, I think that was a valid point the objector raised in relation to in front of the office windows, when them windows are open in the summer months. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Carl, over to you now, please.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with the proximity to the residential areas, but I totally get what the planning officers are saying, and I've been trying to be straight down the line in most of the applications that we determine. I think my bigger concern with this is that we know from the research and the work that Business Durham's done over a number of years, there's a really high demand for business units of this type, in particular in this location, with the existing usage, and it's it's taking that away from something that's already working. We're not looking at an industrial estate here that's really, really struggling for occupancy. You know, we're talking about an industrial estate that's thriving. So I wonder if, you know, from my point of view, taking that away or changing the use to something of this nature could have a detrimental impact, and therefore, you know, I wonder whether there's an argument about loss of amenity in terms of removing that business space from the local community in this area. And I'm sort of clutching here to at the planning policy and thinking back at previous applications, because it just doesn't sit right with me. And I think from a policy point of view, if we're going to start to look at reasons for refusal, I think putting a waste disposal site in the middle of those industrial units takes away that existing sort of business amenity space that we have on the estate.
Thank you, Carl. Now, Patricia.
Thank you, Chair. I found this really difficult because I felt it was quite straightforward, actually, and I still do. It's very low-key, 7 maximum a day, because all these incinerators have a capacity, how long it takes to burn a body. So I'm torn. I'm more in favour of going with this than rejecting it out of hand. I do think the officers have done a very thorough job with this application, and that's why I asked the question about capacity, because I think that is very important. So I'm of a mind to vote for this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Patricia. Are there any other comments from any other members? Well, I will need a mover and a seconder for whichever. You'll move approval. Do I have a seconder for that? Have I a mover for refusal then? David and Craig.
I move refusal on policy 61E. Can be satisfactorily located on suitable land. I would contend it isn't suitable land and identified for employment use. And the County Durham Waste Local Plan 36 states new buildings waste management should be used, carefully sited and designed to complement the location and existing topography. I would say it contravenes both of those policies.
Planning officer to come back in, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points on this before we get to the vote. There's a question about whether other sites are being considered, but for waste development, there isn't a requirement to do a sequential assessment of other sites. We just look at whether the site they've chosen is acceptable or not whether there's a better site available. Now, in terms of policy 61 for looking at the locational requirements of a site, as Councillor Boyes has mentioned, we're looking for land identified for employment use. So we know that the site is allocated for employment use by policy 2. If we go to policy 2, the test is, would a non-B1, B2, B8 development compromise the use of the site for those types of development? And the uses on the site that I'm being told are the sensitive ones are ones that are not B1, B2, B8. So we're effectively prioritising non-employment uses over a use that would be acceptable on an employment site. I think I can just leave that with you, but we have had an appeal decision for the Fornax incinerator this committee dealt with last year. And the refusal reason there was that development would impact other employment sites, and the inspector found against that and allowed the appeal.
Thank you, Chris. Stephen wants a word before.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think if we just build on what Chris is saying there, Chair, and just listening to the debate this morning, I think there's probably 3 or 4 different planning issues at play here. There's been a lot of discussion about the pollution aspect of the development. I think, as Chris set out in the report, and looking at policy 31 in the plan, which talks specifically about odour and noise and particles, I do think it'd be difficult to frame a refusal reason on those grounds when you look at the comments we've received from our Environmental Health Department, and as Chris referenced, the work that we've done with ACOM, who have scrutinised this application to a high degree. Loss of employment land, which Councillor Marshall referenced before, it's my understanding that the amount of employment proposed with this application is probably broadly similar, which we would get with a more traditional type of employment use. So again, I think I would have to advise, Chair, I think members might be struggling if we were to attach a great amount of weight to that. However, I think listening to the debate, and I think the points from Councillor Boyes before, Policy 29, Sustainable Design, Chair, one of the criteria set out in the plan there is about residential amenity. Clearly, as Chris has set out, your officers have come to the view that this type of development in that proximity to the houses just to the east is considered in officer terms acceptable in residential amenity grounds. But if members were to feel that a combination of the height of the chimney, which I think was a point which was raised earlier, and potentially the perceptual impact of having a crematorium facility, albeit I think quite a small one, in that proximity to housing, that is potentially something which I think could be applied weight in terms of a decision to go against the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Chairman Neil's got something to add.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to echo what the 2 planning officers have said, specifically referring to the motion that Councillor Boyes put forward and the reasons that he mentioned. I do have some significant concerns about the sustainability of those reasons. As Mr Shields mentioned, that there isn't a sequential approach required to site selection. It boils down to, is this site suitable, not whether there are other potentially more suitable sites that may be available. And in relation to any impact on other uses on the industrial site and whether this particular use might discourage, expansion or relocation, etc. We have, as Mr Shields mentioned, had a very recent planning inspectorate decision only yesterday where that was the main issue in terms of refusal reason. And you may recall that was an incinerator of a completely different scale to this one, and also specifically for clinical and hazardous waste. And frankly, the inspector has given our arguments on that issue fairly short shrift. So pulling that together, I think we would struggle to sustain reasons for refusal on the basis of those put forward by Councillor Boyes. In terms of residential amenity, clearly that's a much more subjective issue. Should members, wish to consider that further, I'd be open to sort of hear what they've got to say on that. Chair, I'm not sure it's an issue of adding to. I mean, clearly members can make the decision. Officers don't hear, but I am concerned about those 2 reasons that have been put forward. I think I'd be much more comfortable if there was an alternative reason. But clearly, if members wish to stick with those reasons, it can be put to the vote.
Yeah, Craig, come in, please.
Yeah, I think, for whatever reasons this committee has for sort of rejecting this, or whatever people's internal feelings, I think the general steer from the planning office are that if we have an issue with this, we need to go purely for policy 29 as opposed, and that would be my preference if Councillor Boyes would be willing to just go for policy 29. As much as I kind of agree with a lot of what's been said here, that you know, my biggest concern about this is around policy 61, the harm that something like this would do to businesses. And I know people are talking about fund shack, and I believe that, and I agree with the planning officer's sort of assessment that this is fund shack want to set themselves up in an industrial state, then they need to take the risk of the fact that they're doing this sort of thing. But I'm concerned about just the normal employment sites on this side that would be doing this. But amenity is a thing. So I'm happy to second that decision, and my preference would be to just go after policy 29, Chair.
Thank you. Can we sustain that, Neil?
Chair, I think there's a reasonable argument to be had in terms of residential amenity. Just one point. I don't think it's actually policy 29. I think is it 31? Chris? Yeah, it's policy 31. But it doesn't matter. We understand that what's being proposed is a motion to refuse based on the impact of the development on the amenities of the nearby residents that they can reasonably be expected to enjoy.
Thank you. Well, we have a difficult decision to make. Someone said, I think it was the applicant, that you would never see smoke or anything coming from a chimney. But I do recall an occasion going to Durham Crematorium with my wife, and as we were walking in, I could see smoke coming, and I says, there's somebody going up in smoke. So it's over to the vote, and we've got a proposal for refusal. All those in favour of refusal? Thank you. All those against refusal? Thank you. That application is refused. I'm sorry. Mrs. Robinson, maybe you can find a more suitable location, because I'd still like to see your application come forward in some form.
Well, my name's Laura Howes, but yes, I appreciate what's been said today, but I will be appealing against the decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can just wait a couple of minutes till the YouTube's switched off, and then we can go about business.